Have you ever stopped to think about how two different fibers can have, well, completely opposite effects on your digestion? It's a great question, right? One is often suggested for slowing things down, while the other gets recommended to, well, speed things up. So today, we're going to get into the science of apple pectin versus psyllium husk and figure out exactly what's going on inside our bodies.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll need to get on the same page about a key concept called gut motility. Then we'll look at apple pectin, and then we'll look at psyllium husk. After that, we'll put them head to head to see how they really compare. And finally, we'll talk about how you might choose the right one and wrap up with the two totally different ways they work.
All right, first up, what exactly is gut motility? This is really the foundation for everything else we're going to talk about. You know, gut motility is really just a fancy way of saying it's the rhythm of your digestive system. It's all about those muscular contractions that push food all the way through your digestive tract. And the speed of that rhythm, well, that's absolutely crucial. If it's too fast, you might not absorb all the nutrients you need. But if it's too slow, you can end up with other problems, like constipation. And this is exactly where dietary fiber steps in. It's like the master conductor of this whole process. Okay, let's start with our first fiber, apple pectin. We're going to see how this soluble fiber actually works to slow things down.
So imagine this. When you take in apple pectin, the first thing that happens is it hits the acid in your stomach and boof, it forms this soft kind of gooey gel. And that gel is the key to everything. It literally slows down how fast your stomach empties. Then, as that gel continues its journey into the small intestine, it keeps that slow, steady pace. Finally, when it gets to the colon, your gut bacteria think it's a feast. They go to town on it, which is great because they produce some really beneficial compounds. But yeah, that whole fermentation party can also produce a bit of gas.
And this really explains the why behind all of pectin's effects. It's highly water-soluble, which is what lets it form that viscous, gel-like solution. That's where it gets its breaking power. But what I find really fascinating is how it adds bulk. It's not by soaking up water. Instead, it's food for your gut bacteria. The bacteria eat it and then multiply. And it's that increase in bacterial population, the biomass, that actually adds substance to the stool. So it's a biological process, not a mechanical one. That's a really important distinction. So, if there's one thing to remember about apple pectin, it's this. It's a gradual regulator. It's not about force. It's all about gently, slowly, and smoothly regulating the pace of digestion. Okay, let's switch gears completely and talk about psyllium husk. If apple pectin is the brake pedal, you can think of psyllium as the accelerator, and it works in a totally different but just as fascinating way. With psyllium, the secret ingredient is water. I mean, it absorbs a ton of it. We're talking 8 to 14 times its own weight. And when it does, it swells up into this really thick, bulky gel. Now, this is not the soft gel we saw with pectin. This is a substantial mass that adds mechanical bulk. This bulk physically stretches the walls of your intestine, and that tells the muscles, hey, time to contract, time to push. And here's the other crucial part. It mostly resists being fermented by gut bacteria. That means it holds on to its shape and all that water, basically acting like a giant, moving sponge all the way through your system. This unique mix of properties gives psyllium what's often called a stool normalizing effect. And I know that might sound a little contradictory, but the smart sponge analogy really works here. If stool is too hard, the gel brings water to the party and softens things up. But if things are too loose, it absorbs that excess water, giving it more form and substance. It's pretty amazing how it can work in both directions. So the big takeaway for psyllium, it's all about mechanical force. It's a bulking agent that stimulates movement and directly speeds things up. All right, so we've looked at them one by one. Now let's put them side by side. This is where the differences really pop. When you see it all laid out like this, the contrast is just stark. Look, right from the stomach, they're doing different things. Pectin is slowing things down, while psyllium is just adding volume. And that pattern continues all the way through. Pectin slows, psyllium speeds up, and it all comes down to that core mechanism we talked about. Pectin is biological, working through fermentation. Psyllium is mechanical, working through bulk and water. And that explains everything, from why one might cause more gas to why they're used for almost opposite reasons. Okay, so what's the point of all of this science? Why does it matter? Well, it's simple. Once you understand how they work, you can start to figure out which tool is right for the job. And here is where it gets really practical.
Because apple pectin is the slower downer, forming that soft gel, it might be helpful in situations where things are just moving too fast. Think loose stools or when your gut just feels irritated. But on the flip side, because psyllium is all about adding bulk and pushing things along, it's often the go-to when things are moving too slow, with hard stools or constipation.
Okay, and we absolutely have to pause here for a second because this is super important. We're just talking about the general science of how these dietary fibers work. This is not, and I repeat, not medical advice. If you're dealing with any kind of digestive health issue, the first and only step is to talk to a healthcare professional, like your doctor. All right, let's wrap this all up with a final summary of these two very different paths to the same goal: regulation. So really, it all boils down to this. Apple pectin, think slower, smoother, and fermentable. It's a biological regulator. Psyllium husk, think faster, bulk-driven, and mechanical. They both can help with regulation, but they get there through fundamentally different mechanisms. And that really brings us to the final, most important question. Now that you understand how these fibers work, one as a kind of gentle brake and the other as a powerful pusher, it's clear that the choice isn't about which one is better. It's about figuring out which path to regulation your body might actually need.